Hi, in this tutorial, we're gonna talk about some of the best practices when creating your React app architecture. We are gonna see how we can implement a React scalable architecture and how we can organize our files and folders and set our application for success and for scale. These are considered as the best practices contributed by many of community experts. So let's see it.
Code with Sloba.
By default, React doesn't enforce you to use any architectural pattern. But what I'm going to show you today are some best practices and folder structure and architecture of React application, which I gathered over the years, and something that has been considered as an industry standard. As people and developers have been trying different setup and tried it throughout the years and through the scaling of different applications. And this system, in my opinion, and industry, seems like the most reasonable one. So here I have a fresh React.js application and installation. I used npx create React app, but actually, as of the latest, Vite has been coming more and more into industry. So you should be considering Vite as well. So here we have this basic source folder with default app component. So let's see what are the folders that we need to add in order to set our application for success. So first we need to create an assets folder. This is the folder that comprises of project static files such as your logo, fonts, images, favicons, etc. The next folder on our list is components folder. Components folder should take things like buttons, forms, avatars, inputs, all these components that you use across different pages, across different components even. So basically shared components. The next folder on our list should be views. Views contains all the web pages, or basically you can consider them as routes. So basically how many pages do you have, you will create a new view for it. And inside of this folder, if you have components that you want to use only on this page, you will not place it inside of the components folder, but rather you would place it inside of this views folder. The next one on this list is the services folder. In the services folder, you would place your logic to fetching the external API. For the next folder, let's call it utils. Inside of the utils folder, you would place functions that are reusable across different components. Let's say you have a custom function which performs some calculations and you use it across your application in multiple pages and multiple components. You will place it inside of the utils folder here. The next on our list is hooks. You can definitely see some overlaps between the hooks and utils. But inside of the hooks folder, you create your custom hooks in your code, which is reusable for your component logic. Sometimes you create a custom function and sometimes you create a custom hook for the logic that you need to reuse. So depending on what you need to create, you would place it inside of the hooks or utils folder. The next folder on our list is the store folder. Inside of this folder, you will place files that manage the state of your application. So you would create files such as reducers, actions, even sagas. Now let's see what would be the actual files structure. So let's say that you want to create new component and that component is button. So you would create a new folder for every single component and let's call it a button. And then file name of the actual component would follow the same naming pattern. So button, and then extension depends on the actual logic or actual language that you're using. If you're using TypeScript, then TSX or JS or JSX if you're not using it. Then you would create a new style file. So let's name it button.css. And if you're testing your application, and obviously you should, button.test.js. And this should be a standard file structure for your components. Also, what has been considered the best practice is to have one file where you do all your imports and exports. So let's add a new file and let's name it index.js inside of the components folder here. So let's say that we implement this button component. So it's just a simple button element. And now we should import it inside of our index file. So import button, and then you would export the button here in this file and all the other components that you have. So now if you want to import your component in other files, let's say in the app.js, here you do import button from components, like so, without adding some additional folder structure. But you should improve this even further, and you should use absolute imports without using this // notation. So what you need to do is inside of the root folder here in your application, you need to create another file, and it needs to be called JSON config. So jsconfig.json, like so. And here you need to tell to the compiler what is the base URL so that you can use absolute imports. So this is the configuration that you need to add: compiler and the base URL, which includes the source folder. And now inside of your components folder here in the app.js, you can just use absolute imports. And look how clean this looks like. Now let's take a look for the other folders. So in the assets folder, as we said, you would have folders like fonts. Then you had folder like PNG or images. And you had another folder for, like, let's say, additional CSS. Maybe you have some third-party library, right? In the hooks folder, you would create hook files which have the extensions like use form.js. And now, depending on the number of hooks that you have, you may place them in the folders, or depending on the modules that you have, you can split them by modules, features, pages, and depending how you structure your application. In the services folder, you would probably have a file such as http.js, and here you would perform all the API external fetches and retrievals and updates and all the methods that you use. Then inside of a store folder, you would create new folders for every single, let's say, a page, or if it's a feature, or if it's a module. So depending on how you structure and split your application, you would create another folder. Let's say that we have about page. So inside of the about folder, you would create new files, for example, actions.js. Then we would create a new file for reducers.js. We will also need another file for initial state.js. We will also create another file for sagas. And we will add one more file for the selectors. And this would be something that is usual file structure for a store state management. For utils, you have similar file structure as for the services and hooks. And for the views, you create folders depending on your pages. So let's say we have this about page. And inside of this about, we would create new file. And they follow the same naming syntax. So about.js. Now, obviously, you need to have a styling, about.css. And if you have some additional components, and you should have, if it's not very small page, then you should create another folder and call it as components. Inside of this folder, you would create components that are used only for this about page. But if you're using any shared components, for example, if it's used on this page and on the app.js or some other files, then you would store it and create it inside of this shared components folder. And this is all what I wanted to share with you guys. What are some best practices when architecting your React application, and how to set up a folder structure and file structure to make your application set up for success and for scaling without a mess up. And if you want to support my channel and get a full source code of every single video that I'm doing, feel free to check out patreon.com/codewithsloba to get full access. See you there.
Well, that's all for this React video.
And thanks for stopping by.
And don't forget to subscribe.
Code with Sloba.
Thank you for watching the entire video. To see more React tutorials, click here.